1997, British author J.K. Rowling published a little book you might have heard of called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, or Sorcerer's Stone, depending on what part of the world you live in. And it was the beginning of one of the sensations of the 90s. There were suddenly 4 books, which were majorly popular to a point where you knew it was only going to be a matter of time before Hollywood came a-knocking. 2001, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the movie, came out. And it was the beginning of the great mega franchise in Hollywood.
That same year, another long-awaited adaptation of a British novel came out, The Lord of the Rings.
With the 1-2 punch of Harry Potter and the Lord of the Rings, Hollywood suddenly realized we can make a lot of money off of fantasy. And they scoured the shelves looking for any fantasy book they could turn into the next big thing. The Seeker, the Spiderwick Chronicles, Aragon, the Golden Compass, Percy Jackson, even the Bridge to Terabithia, which, by the way, is not a fantasy story, was marketed like one because, boy oh boy, they really wanted to fill those seats and get those bucks because fantasy is in now. Hooray!
So it was kind of inevitable that the Chronicles of Narnia would get its own version in this wave. And it's no surprise that they were trying to ape the style and tone of the Lord of the Rings movies. Especially since Lewis and Tolkien were famously friends in real life back in the day. And I can really understand the epicification impulse, because just within the first book, you have a climactic battle with a bunch of talking animals, some magical creatures, and a menacing witch and a god in a lion form. You have a prophecy, you have detailed lore you can allude to, you got some majestic landscapes, and so on.
Problem sort of became, yes, C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were friends, and yes, it is very likely that if it had not been for Tolkien, Lewis may not have ever converted to Christianity, but it is also a well-known fact that C.S. Lewis did not take fantasy nearly as seriously as his friend Tolkien did.
Where Tolkien spent the majority of his life writing and rewriting the Silmarillion, afraid to publish it because it wasn't quite there yet, Lewis cranked out the 7 Narnia books over the span of 7 years.
Much to Tolkien's annoyance. What worked and what didn't?
In 2005, we got The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, distributed by Disney and directed by the guy who made Shrek, of all things. So a lot of people were skeptical going into it. But it did wind up grossing over $700 million at the box office, so it did something right, and it's found its audience.
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty natural that they would move on to a sequel.
Yay! Somebody got a sequel! Isn't that exciting?
Yay! And this one only did about a little over half of what The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe did. So Disney jumped ship, and then Walden Media teamed up with Fox to get The Voyage of the Dawn Treader made. Dawn Treader made even less than Prince Caspian, only about $400 million. So the franchise was abandoned, and Walden Media has since lost the rights to it.
Was it a good series that just fizzled out as time wore on, or was it bad from the get-go?
Well, let's start by looking at what about the epicification process worked.
I agree.
The most obvious is Tilda Swinton as the White Witch. She played the character with so much depth and gravitas that I would just watch her doing that performance off of a wall for an hour. Her faux tenderness with Edmund is so genuine that you genuinely believe why he would trust her. And it makes the reveal that she's actually the villain that much more impactful.
I love the design they gave Tilda Swinton, too. That was very, very good costume making. I didn't even notice at first, and her crown is actually melting as spring wears on. And it's attention to details like that are just brilliant. So, if Barbara Kellerman was taking a page from Margaret Hamilton, I think Tilda Swinton is more taking a page from Alan Rickman as Professor Snape. In the Harry Potter books, Professor Snape has whole paragraphs that are in all caps. A part in the 5th book where Harry accidentally discovers some personal memories. In the book, Snape is throwing things at him and screaming at him to get out. Movie Snape never raises his voice once. That's this White Witch. She's more nuanced. She's more laid back, and it's more intimidating because when she does raise her voice, duck and cover, guys.
That portrayal works perfectly with the stone table scene. Rather than constantly yelling, her moments of terse whispering to Aslan are even scarier, actually.
No, Aslan, very disappointed in you. Ugh.
Plus, the filmmakers went so far as to have her wear Aslan's mane into battle after killing him. You unmitigated witch.
The casting in this movie, on a whole, is very good. Clinton's awesome. I think the kids were also cast very well too. They might not look as much like siblings, but it works okay. And as it turns out, Edmund and Lucy do in fact have similar noses.
Portrayal of the kids, particularly for those who have read the books, feels a lot like creating character arcs out of whole cloth. And you really don't even need to do that much in the first book. With the possible exception of Lucy, all kids have their flaws and they have their arcs. But Peter has to go through this whole arc of not being sure if he's worthy of being king. Hey, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, called. He said your stole is made up for the movie character arc.
Kind of on a similar theme, I do think that the kids have the should we stay and help these people conversation maybe one too many times. We kind of already know that they're going to stay. Can we just get to that part?
Peter then goes into Prince Caspian, missing being king, to the point that he starts fights in train stations for little to no provocation.
You didn't respect him, don't you know?
And when he returns to Narnia, he misses being king so much that he fights with Caspian over who should rule Narnia. I don't think that Peter's a particularly engaging character in the book Prince Caspian. Honestly, what was wrong with him honorably letting Caspian take over?
It's not like he's gonna stay in Narnia anyway.
No. And this idea could have been subtler, like he revels in being called High King Peter again. And then he has to pause for a moment and go, no, no, Caspian is my successor.
This is what I meant by Prince Caspian ultimately was not Caspian's story when it should have been. The movie really wanted to give the Pevensies more to do, which makes sense. They were the cast of characters from the previous movie, so you want to expand on their arcs. But Peter and Susan are leaving after this story. This is the new generation of characters taking over. I feel like by the time this movie was over, I there was more growth from Peter than there was Caspian. Caspian himself, we don't really see any of his growth into becoming king. We don't really see his relationship with his father, which, by the way, is going to come back and bite Don Treader in the butt something fierce. We don't really see his relationship with the professor, as he's called in the movie. Dr. Cornelius is Caspian's mentor in the book, and in the movie, he's kind of reduced to a glorified cameo, which I would have really liked to see Caspian, hearing the stories of old Narnia and wishing it was true, and that's what sets him apart from the rest of his people, which is what makes him the one who's actually fit to lead Narnia.
That's in the movie. He mentions in Truffle Hunter's house that he heard all of those stories and he's the only Telmarine who believes them.
As you can see, it left a great impression on me. First rule of filmmaking is show, don't tell. A conversation about, oh, this is who I am and what I believe, isn't quite the same.
She and I have slightly different takes on the Prince Caspian movie.
Can we at least agree that Peter's continuing hero's journey hijacked Prince Caspian's arc?
No, I want to fight about it! Okay, fine.
I have a point. Say it.
You have a point.
Thank you.
One oddity of the Prince Caspian book is structure. We follow the Pevensies from England into Narnia, and then once they're at the ruins of Cair Paravel, they have to learn Caspian's backstory from Trumpkin, and we spend several chapters on that. The movie moves their summoning to Narnia earlier in the timeline so that Caspian's backstory and their journey can play parallel as subplots for a while. I think that was a very smart economic choice. And it's far better for a film medium than the miniseries solution, which is just to show Caspian's backstory up front and occasionally cut over to the Pevensies at a train station waiting for their cue.
The Narnia books are very short, so all the movies had to add things to meet feature length. And some of them work and some of them don't. In Prince Caspian's case, they do some things very well, but I think the final battle in particular took way too long, and some of the arcs were a little unnecessary.
And in my own personal opinion, I think that the Caspian movie handled the sit around and wait aspect of the story way better than any of the other versions.
Possibly even the book.
Possibly even the book, yes. In the book, there's a segment where Lucy sees Aslan as they're walking along, and none of the other children believe her. And then they slowly come around to, like, oh, okay, I believe you. And then I believe you. And then they all see Aslan face to face before they ever meet Caspian. In the movie, that segment is drawn out up until the third act, which A, makes the outcome of the battle less certain and thus increases tension, and B, makes finding Aslan and getting him involved in the battle something the characters have to actually do, and I appreciated that. Plus, it drives home the theme of faith better than the book did.
Some of the expansions worked, some of them did not. One that did not, for example.
Well, that would be the Caspian Susan romance.
Yeah, you know how much I hate forced romances.
Well, it's not even just that it's forced, which it is. In the last battle, C.S. Lewis famously wrote Susan out of the story off screen, or off page. Not really sure how that works in a book.
I mean, either way, fans have not been particularly pleased by that.
No. Lucy says of Susan that she preferred nylons, party invitations, and lipstick to talking about Narnia. And it's just kind of insulting to the character.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the fact is, if any of the characters were going to not believe in Narnia anymore, it'd be Susan. Because she was always trying to be more adult than she actually was, and more practical, more intelligent. So there's material in the books for the filmmakers to build on if they wanted to foreshadow Susan's turn. This was not the way to do it. Implying that she abandons Narnia for a boy that she'll never see again? No. Implying that she abandons Narnia for a boy she flirted with for a few hours and kissed exactly once. That's low. Don't do that.
It's even more insulting than just brushing it off. At least they gave Susan's archery skills something to do. The movie series did, on a whole, use the gifts from Father Christmas more than the books did. Especially that dagger, which I'm 100% sure that even C.S. Lewis forgot that he gave Lucy.
In hindsight, the first movie probably emphasized Peter's character arc to the expense of the other children as well. For instance, I don't know if you ever realized this, but the thrones that they sit on at Cair Paravel all show the gifts that they got from Father Christmas. And that was a neat detail. And when I noticed that, I was like, oh wow, I wonder what Edmund's is. Too bad the movie never gives you a clear enough shot to tell. I had to scour through Google to find an answer. It's a representation of the moment that he smashed the witch's wand. Why couldn't you give me that moment? That would have been an awesome tribute to that character arc.
It's true. It's funny. The first movie does work with Edmund's character, though. For example, at the beginning, they show the London air raids, which I gotta be honest, the first time we saw this movie, my mom actually wondered if we had wandered into the wrong theater. Edmund at the beginning is shown running back into the house to get a picture of his dad. Aw, that's so sweet. Stupid, but sweet.
Throughout the series, Edmund is usually the most adult out of the characters. And I like that they never come out and say, oh, it's because he messed up the hardest, so he learned the hardest lesson.
Mm-hmm.
It's there for you to pick up on, but it's not spelled out. And an excellent example of this is Peter and Caspian are both tempted to resurrect the White Witch, and it's Edmund who has to snap them out of it.
Yeah, they really, really wanted to keep Tilda Swinton in this series.
Edmund's character arc falters a little bit in Voyage of the Dawn Treader. He's shown missing being a king, and he tries to enlist and join the army to fight in World War II.
Didn't we do this with Peter in the last movie?
Yeah, in their defense, Edmund's version of it is more that he misses being independent, whereas Peter was more that he missed being respected. But doing them back to back like this, they feel so much like the same character.
Yeah, it doesn't help that it's not really distinctly fleshed out enough to make it different from Peter's.
No.
Wouldn't it have been more interesting if Lucy had been the one who missed Narnia the most? After all, she is the one who's always loved it the most.
Edmund is also tempted by a vision of the White Witch at Dark Island.
Because we really, 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 really want to keep Tilda Swinton in this franchise. I get it. She was the best part of the first movie, but you gotta move on.
Either putting her into Prince Caspian or the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, the way that they did, could have worked. But doing both back to back feels repetitive and redundant. Given the choice between the two of them, I would say that her scene in Prince Caspian was far more effective. So drop her from Dawn Treader. You do not need her.
Especially since in the Dawn Treader arc, it doesn't really go anywhere. In Caspian, it at least kind of goes somewhere. In Dawn Treader, this evil mist of evil is focusing on the White Witch tempting Edmund to make him king again, even though he's been king already. But that's beside the. But this is a temptation for some reason, and this is even sillier when you realize that while the evil mist of evil is tempting Edmund, Eustace is literally 5 feet away from putting the last sword on the table to save the day and defeat the evil mist. Why are you pouring all of your energy into recreating the White Witch and tempting Edmund? Shouldn't you be pouring all of your energy into tempting Eustace into not putting the last sword on the table? Did you take conquering the universe lessons from Emperor Palpatine?
Palpatine was effective for a couple decades.
Yeah, he just got lazy at the end, I suppose. Enough about that. Let's talk about the other best casting choice of the first movie, Georgie Henley as Lucy Pevensey.
I swear she was concocted in a lab somewhere to be adorable.
I would argue that when it comes to adapting The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Lucy and Aslan are your tentpoles that you have to get them right if you're going to do the story justice at all. After that, Edmund and the White Witch, then the other characters. I think this movie nailed Lucy. Her sheer wonder as she's seeing Narnia for the first time is spot on.
It's more enchanting than the landscape itself, and the simple image of her standing next to a lamppost in the middle of a wood would have been a great enough image for your poster rather than a sixth of the poster.
We're trying to be the next Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, remember? At least all the people on that poster are, in fact, in the movie.
Not like the Voyage of the Dawn Treader poster that puts Peter and Susan up front, despite them hardly being in the movie.
Susan had exactly 2 scenes, and Peter has exactly 1 scene, and they're not even in the book. Why are they on this poster? That's just dumb. But again, you started off strong, and then you kind of meandered into mediocre to bad. Lucy's characterization also falls off the rails in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
Yeah, I actually like her in Prince Caspian. She's one of my favorite characters because her stalwart innocence in the face of tragedy is genuinely touching. But in Dawn Treader, in the book, there's a scene where Lucy is flipping through a spell book and comes across a beautifying spell and says she wants to look like Susan.
Yeah, this kind of comes out of nowhere in the book, too.
The movie tries to make it into a character flaw by just having her repeatedly show that she wants to be pretty.
This is code for I want to be pretty, by the way.
Yes.
She does that with her hair 3 times in the first 10 minutes. And I didn't even mean to count.
It's not a bad idea, it's just executed awfully.
Oh, you mean Lucy shouldn't be trying to flirt with Caspian, who her sister had a thing for in the last movie?
Yes, that would be a dumb idea.
Yeah. And you know how this works. You're not gonna stay. Why are you. Whatever. This movie has this tendency to try to take plot elements from the book and make them last longer than they did in said book.
But the way that they do that is just by delaying the payoff. For instance,
Yeah.
when Lucy finds the beautifying spell, she's tempted to use it, and then hears Aslan roar, so she rips the page out of the book and stuffs it in her pocket. And then she wakes up in the middle of the night and goes to use the spell, and then she and Aslan have the conversation. Nothing was gained from delaying this. There was no reason to make this 2 separate scenes. In trying to make an episodic story less episodic, you just wound up having an episode that feels like it should impact other things, but does not. Another good example of this is turning Eustace into a dragon. He turns into a dragon about halfway through the book, but in the movie, he stays that way up until the third act.
Why? Is he gonna have a big fight with a sea serpent or something? I was kidding! You know, I never thought
Yeah.
I'd say this, but they actually did a good job with Eustace in Dawn Treader. In the book, in the miniseries, his switch from bad to good was kind of a light switch. But here, they did start to build it up before he was turned into a dragon, and his bond with Reepicheep in his dragon form is pretty touching. There's that. But again,
Yeah, about that climax. The characters show up on Dark Island is purported to be a location where dreams come true, but the twist is that only bad dreams come true there. The movie takes this from the second to last island they visit to the last island that they visit in order to make it a more proper climax. That makes sense in theory. Have the characters face off against their literal inner demons. Okay, not literal, but you know what I mean. Have the characters face off against their own flaws, which should have been the conflict this whole time. I can get behind that. What I cannot get behind is that Dark Island is transformed from just a static location that they visit to a big mist that is permeating the entire Eastern Ocean and consuming people whole for reasons.
you might have picked up we're not the biggest fans of the evil mist of evil.
Calling it an evil mist of evil.
What would you prefer I call it?
Green mist.
Green mist.
Green mist?
It's green. It floats across the ocean, the great big cloud of sin. It sees your helpless families in and draws them in. What is its motivation? Where do we all begin? It wants the scares like Stephen King or seriousness like Schindler's List. Green mist.
Green mist.
Green mist? It's green.
We'll develop it in sequels that we will never get. Tie it into silver chair, you bet. Of all the epic defying, this is the dumbest yet. Box Office Returns will make Fox miss. This is the Ballad of Green Mist.
The scene where the green mist is introduced is really the point where the movie jumps the shark. Up until now, it had its flaws, but it was salvageable. Once the green mist takes over, the plot becomes so much dumber for it.
It's really confusing. An evil mist generates from an island where nightmares come true, eats people, or sacrificed to it, and then leaves again. But its intention is to keep expanding into all of the worlds and consume all the light from it or something. And the only way to defeat it is to take these 7 magic swords and lay them at Aslan's table, and that will make the evil mist go poof. First of all, that is insanely convoluted. Secondly, it really smashes into the plot of Dawn Treader, and it doesn't fit. So it turns out that 7 exiled lords actually ventured out to conquer this evil mist. If that's the case, why does Caspian think that they were exiled? Why does Caspian not know about this evil mist of evil? Why did the 7 lords split up and go to all these different islands and not send their magic swords along with their friends if the swords are what's needed to defeat this thing? Why do Lucy and Edmund know nothing about these magic swords when they're supposedly from the Narnian Golden Age? Scooby does know that the Golden Age of Narnia was the Pevensies' reign, right? Also, why did these 7 lords have these magic swords from the Narnian Golden Age? The Telmarans didn't believe in old Narnia, remember? The climax of the lords who they find on the island who throws his magic sword into Eustace's back because he thinks that Eustace is an enemy, that Eustace flies off the other way towards Aslan's table, but everybody keeps fighting the evil mist anyway, even though the last sword they needed just flew off in the opposite direction, so there's no reason to continue to be here because the thing you need just went that way.
It just raises too many questions.
I like to imagine that they were going to develop those ideas further in the Horse and His Boy and Silver Chair movies, but we never got there.
Yeah. Are you telling me that the Amazing Spider-Man movies took cues from the Chronicles of Narnia movies?
You can tell that they were interested in a larger scale story because the wardrobe in the first movie has scenes from The Magician's Nephew carved into it, and Professor Kirk keeps his tobacco in a silver apple, and anyone who's read The Magician's Nephew can tell you that that is a significant plot point.
Some of these additions were great, and some were terrible. And another one that didn't work was the little girl that stows aboard the Dawn Treader. What was her name again?
I don't even know.
Nor do I care. Her mother was consumed by the evil mist, and her dad has now joined the crew because he's going to go off and fight the evil mist. And the little girl stows away because she doesn't want to be away from her dad. Oh, that's so sweet, but it ultimately adds absolutely nothing to this movie.
In fact, there's a scene where the Dufflepuds have to pause and discuss why they need Lucy rather than random little girl, despite the fact that their only qualification is that they need a female for their task. Not only is she adding nothing to the plot, they have to take time out to explain why she adds nothing to the plot.
Really good writing there. If you wanted to make the evil mist plot something that was more personal to somebody, wouldn't it have made more sense if it was like the captain's wife or something? This movie already has a lot of characters. Caspian, Edmund, Lucy, Eustace, Reepicheep, the captain. And we are adding in crew member with wife and daughter. Less is more. It's one thing to have supporting characters with fully fledged arcs, but again, they are only going to be fully fledged if you take your time and plan out who actually has something to do and then just trim the rest.
Can we at least agree that Aslan is always a well-handled character?
Yeah, when I first heard that Liam Neeson was going to be the voice of Aslan, I was very excited. Neeson can be very gruff and threatening when he needs to be, but he can also be very soft-spoken and very father-like. What could go wrong? On the whole, especially in the first movie, not that much. It's a good adaptation of the Aslan character. Even if he is nicer than his literary counterpart, it still works. He still has the roar, and he is still threatening. Sort of. One change that I've kind of gone back and forth for years on whether I liked or not is Susan and Lucy sending a tree spirit to tell Peter and Edmund that Aslan is dead. On one hand, this is a good change because it's been established in Narnia lore that the trees are listening, so why not actually work the trees into the story? And then I realized something. Peter goes in to check Aslan's tent and he comes out and says, "Right, it's gone." Edmund says, "Then you'll have to lead us." Hold on a minute! You mean to tell me that Aslan gave Peter no heads up whatsoever that he was going to be leading this army campaign by himself? This is supposed to be the nice Aslan. That's really kind of rude. Well, not even rude, that's just dumb. You can go back and forth on whether or not Aslan knew he was going to come back to life or not, depending on who you talk to. In the book, there is that line about how the deep magic had never been put to the test until now. But even if Aslan does know that he's going to come back to life for sure, you're still taking a huge chance that you're going to come back to life, run to the witch's house, unfreeze everybody, and come back to join the battle, and Peter has to hold the White Witch off all that time without knowing that he's supposed to do that. This is again a problem that could have been easily avoided if you just remembered the part where Peter and Aslan have a discussion about strategy. Peter says, "You'll be there, won't you, Aslan?" Which Aslan replies, "I can give you no promise of that." Would that have been so hard?
Another weird thing about Aslan is that his size is inconsistent. When he first shows up in Prince Caspian, he explains to Lucy, "For every year that you grow, so will I." Which seems like enough of an explanation. But then Dawn Treader rolls around and he's smaller again. What the heck? "I'm sorry, a talking fox made me shrink."
And then there's the aforementioned Aslan apparently accepting excuses. If the first thing that Aslan says upon meeting the Pevensies and hearing about Edmund's betrayal is, "I'm sure there's an explanation," kind of puts an odd spin on his conversation with Edmund at the stone table that Edmund, according to the book, would never forget.
"So, young man, what is your excuse?" "You see, sir, pretty girl." "Ah, yes. I made extra special care to make sure that my archenemy would be sexy when I created her. Thank you for noticing my handiwork. You may go now."
These are problems with the characterization of Aslan that Mr. Neeson, for as talented as he is, just can't quite get around. Points for trying, though.
Well, I think that about wraps us up. So Let's go ahead and get into some ratings, shall we?
Okay.
For the first movie, I'd give it a satisfactory. For the second movie, good enough. And for the third movie, a profound meh.
I think you're being too kind to Don Treader.
Meh. I'm Nathan.
I'm Stephanie.
Thank